Hello everyone, welcome to 6.5, Common Denominators and Equivalent Fractions. The essential question is, how can you rewrite a pair of fractions so that they have a common denominator? The vocabulary that you need to write down is common denominator. This is when two fractions have the same whole or denominator. Okay, and denominator is the whole part. So like the numerator is part of the whole. Okay, the denominator is the whole. So like if I give you the fraction 1/2. Okay, the numerator is the 1, that's the part. The denominator is the 2, that's the whole. Okay, so that's what a common denominator is, when they both have the same whole or denominator. Alright, and then equivalent fraction is the other part. This is when the numerator and denominator of two fractions are different, but the values are the same. For example, 1/2 and 2/4 are equivalent fractions. Because if you took 1/2 and you multiplied the 1 by 2 and the 2 by 2, it would equal 2/4. These are equivalent fractions. They are equal to each other. Their value is the same. It is still a half. So those fractions are equivalent. Alright, the steps are to multiply the denominator to find a common denominator. And the second step is to list the multiples of the number and circle the first one they both have in common. That's how I find the least common denominator, which we're going to have to do in examples 2 and 3. So let's go ahead and do example 1. If you need to pause, go ahead and do so now. That's everything you need to write. Okay? And let's go ahead and do example 1. Example 1 says use a common denominator to write an equivalent fraction for each fraction. So you're going to find a common denominator between these two, and then you're going to make equivalent fractions. Something that's equal to 1/5, something that's equal to 1/2. Okay? So what we can do to find a common denominator is we can just multiply the denominators together. Okay? We can just multiply 5 times 2. And that means we get the denominators of 10. Okay? So what did I multiply 5 by? Well, I multiplied it by 2, so I got to multiply the 1 by 2. That makes it 2. What did I multiply this 2 by? 5. I multiplied the 2 by 5, so I got to multiply the 1 by 5. 1 times 5 is 5. So, an equivalent fraction for 1/5 is 2/10, and an equivalent fraction for 1/2 is 5/10. And they both have the same denominator, or common denominator, of 10. So that's one way to find a common denominator and write equivalent fractions. If you're ever stuck on finding a common denominator, we'll just multiply the denominators that you have. Alright, let's get to example number 2, because this one, it tells us to find the least common denominator. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. This says use the least common denominator to write an equivalent fraction for each fraction. So when they ask us to find the least common denominator, we need to look at the multiples of a number. So let's look at multiples of 6. Okay, and this is where your math facts and your multiplication facts come in handy. 6 times 1 is 6, 6 times 2 is 12, 6 times 3 is 18, 6 times 4 is 24, 6 times 5 is 30, 6 times 6 is 36. Okay, and I'm going to stop right there. Maybe I'll find a common denominator. Okay, let's do 9. 9 times 9 is 18, 9 times 2 is 27. But I'm going to stop there because I already see that they both have the same multiple of 18. So that told me to find the least common denominator, meaning the lowest number, the lowest multiple that they both have in common. And they both have in common 18. Okay, so that's going to be my least common multiple and my least common denominator. When I say least common multiple, it's the lowest number that two numbers have in common that is a multiple of them. So multiples is when you multiply that number by something, the product would be the multiple. Alright? And hopefully that makes sense. But 18, and if you have questions, write that down. Okay, if you have questions. But 18 is the least common multiple and the least common denominator. So I know that my fractions have to equal 18. So I'm going to erase this real quick. Write that down if you need it. But I know that my fractions are going to have to end or have a denominator of 18. So 5/6. To get that 18, I had to multiply the 6 by 3. So I need to also multiply the 5 by 3. And that equals 15 over 18. Now for the 2 over 9. To get the 9 as 18, I had to multiply that by 2. So I got to multiply the 2 by 2. And 2 times 2 is 4. So, the least common denominator is 18. And my equivalent fractions are 5/18 and 4/18. Alright? So these would be my answers. Okay? Once again, make sure you write down any questions if you get stuck. But the one thing that's going to really make a difference is, do you know your multiplication facts? Because if you don't, this is going to be a struggle. If you do, it won't be that big of a struggle. And if you are struggling with your multiplication facts, look at the multiplication charts. Make sure you're looking at the multiples of the different numbers. You know, and you can skip count 6, 12, 18, 24. All right? Let's go and do example number 3. It's the same as example number 2. It says use the least common denominator to write an equivalent fraction for each fraction. So we got 8 and we have 12. So I'm going to list the different multiples of each one. 8 times 1 is 8. 8 times 2 is 16. 8 times 3 is 24. I'm going to stop there. 12 times 1 is 12. 12 times 2 is 24. I'm going to stop there. I know that they both have 24 in common. So, 1 over 12, to make it 24, you had to multiply by 2. And whatever you do the bottom, you do the top. 1 times 2 is 2. Okay? 3 over 8. Well, I had to make it 24, I had to multiply the 8 by 3. So I got to multiply the 3 by 3. And I know 3 times 3 is 9. So, my two fractions that are equivalent are 2 24 and 9 over 24. And they have the least common denominator of 24. Okay? That's it for today's lesson. Thank you for watching. Have a good one, ladies and gentlemen.